Huh? Where is it? Do we have it?
I think we should.
It's good. Good afternoon. Just a word of warning first. This talk will contain maths and code. So a bit about me first. I'm a retired communications engineer. I worked for Marconi's, Ferranti's, BT. But these days, I spend a lot of time in my camper van, visiting my family and going to festivals. Festivals not quite like this one, but music festivals. And I also spend a lot of time in the pub. That one quite a lot, actually. And the reason for that is there's music in the pub, and also it's considerably warmer than my camper van most of the year. Anyway, at the beginning of this year, my mobile phone company told me that they were going to turn off 2G and 3G networks. That gave me a bit of a problem because I had a 2G tracker fitted to my van whose sole purpose was to enable me to remotely turn on my electric blanket just before I left the pub, so I could have a nice warm bed to head for in the winter, in fact, most of the year. We don't really turn on a fan, but that's more important these days at the moment. So my requirements were these. I wanted something off the shelf really. I didn't fancy building any more stuff. It needed to be pretty discreet. I didn't fancy walking into a pub with miles of cables and aerials and whatever else. So those were my requirements. Also, the pretty big one there is no subscriptions to your mobile phone companies, thank you very much. So pretty much the first system to suggest itself was APRS. It's been around for 40 odd years. There's loads of equipment for it. It's used all over the place. It's used on used on CubeSats for telemetry. It's used in many places, and there's lots of equipment for it. The data link layer, layer 2, is the amateur version of the old X25. And the physical layer pretty much remained one option for about 30 years, but in the last 10 years, another option has become available. So this talk will mainly be a comparison of the two options that are available. So, meet the contestants. Here we are. On the left-hand side is a scruffy old man. He's representing audio frequency shift keying over FM. And on the right is a very attractive young lady who happens to be called LoRa and is my daughter. So these are the two options we have for layer 1 APRS. This was my implementation of the system using the old-fashioned audio frequency shift keying. On the left is the equipment I've got in my van. It's a cheap Baofeng radio, and it's got the grey thing on the side is an audio sound card, which has got a USB-C out that goes straight into a Raspberry Pi, which is bolted on the side of that project box. And inside the project box is a mains relay and a little interface to the Pi. That's all it is. And in the pub, all I have to take is, you can take either an Android or an iPhone, but the Android app is much, much better. And I'll take that little radio with me as well, and that can be discreetly hidden away. That's another cheap walkie-talkie, but that one's got APRS on it. So it's quite a cheap setup, quite a simple setup. That's it in my van. It's that project box in the middle there with all the wires, but the main thing is it's got a big relay in the side there which will switch quite a few amps at 240 volt. Okay, the software there is on the Raspberry Pi. It's running Linux, and it's got 4 other programs, and that's it. This is the main this is the main program that is running on it. And the first 12 lines of this are, as you can probably see, just the initialization of the Raspberry Pi to output on 2 ports, GPIO 24 and 17. Line 14 is just there to kill any current existing Direwolf running programs, because we don't want to, they don't have more than one running. Then line 16 is a single line, a big long line, and the first thing is it calls Direwolf. It calls it with the option T to put a timestamp on everything, pipes that to grep. Grep's just looking for my call sign, and that's then teed off to SED. There's 2 instances of SED running. One is looking for the word started, and the other's looking for the word stopped, and they fire off 2 other smaller scripts, the started script and the stopped script, which gives me my acknowledgement that it's received my command. Okay, the 2 other scripts are just those simple scripts there. They are initiated by SED and basically give an acknowledgement of either the equipment being turned on or the equipment being turned off. So I can see that it's actually received my message from the pub. So that is that part. Now, as for the performance, AFSK is not ideal over walkie-talkies, which are designed for voice. And the main problem is that they are fitted with pre-emphasis and or de-emphasis, and maybe not. And either way, it's a source of distortion for the data. But on the plus side, Direwolf's pretty good software, much better than the old source, the old units we used to have in the 80s and 90s for decoding APRS. And also there's some options in Direwolf to make it more resilient to single-bit errors. Right, so I said there'd be a bit of maths because we need to establish some sort of baseline to compare the 2 systems, LoRa and AFSK over FM. I dug this out of an old textbook. This is the generally accepted performance for AFSK over FM as a non-coherent detection system. The main thing to pick up here, if you look for an error rate down the left-hand side, down the y-axis of 10 to the minus 5, that equates to about 14 dBs of EB over N naught. Now, the point I want to make here is we must compare the 2 systems on a fair basis. Signal-to-noise power ratio is not a fair basis when you're talking about spread spectrum systems, because effectively they can spread themselves over whatever they like and get down to really low signal-to-noise ratios, and then they de-spread themselves back up to where they want to be. So the only real comparison you can make, is to use the energy per bit to the noise power spectral density, which is a dimensionless quantity. If you really want to have the signal-to-noise ratio, you've got to multiply that by the data rate, R, and divide it by the bandwidth. Now, I've basically assumed a 2-to-1 ratio here between the data rate and the bandwidth. It's probably a lot worse than that in most cases, but anyway, that's 3 dBs, so that takes the signal-to-noise to 11 dBs. But the thing I want you to remember here is the 14 dBs as a figure of merit for the old-fashioned system. I was going to do a demo, but unfortunately I can show it to anybody here, and it's working on site here, backwards and forwards, no bother at all. But the Android phone I've got would not play ball with the HDMI. So this is a screenshot of what actually happens when I send a message. The message comes from my call-2, sends that, and then the reply comes back with the test on if it's detected that I want it turned on. The other important thing to remember is its line of sight. And here, the previous system I had was a cellular mobile radio system. Now, they have base stations which are 50 meters tall, shoved on the highest point of ground roundabout, and they're probably running hundreds of watts. Here, we've got a system where both antennas are between 1 and 2 meters, roughly, which is not great. So in the urban environment, any of those sort of mobile radio environments, you will be lucky to get a mile. But that's how it is, that's physics. If the pub happens to be on the top of a hill, great. If it's not, we might have to be a bit closer. Okay, this is the competition, which is available now at a much cheaper price. The top big board is a LoRa tracker for 70 centimeters, and the lower board is the same board. It just doesn't have the U-Blocks GPS receiver on it. So I've done some tests. I've implemented both Meshtastic with this system and also APRS. So the LoRa physical layer has got many options, and you can mix and match whatever you want really with the LoRa chips. That's the sort of the main factors you can vary. So Meshtastic, it's become very popular recently. It's available on the license-free bands, subject to meeting the Ofcom IR 2030 requirement. It's also, I've used it on 70 centimeters with this equipment, and I've used it both as Meshtastic using, I think they call it long fast. That's what I'll show you in a minute what that actually means. So I implemented that, and also there's now, well, the other thing I should say is Mesh Core has become more popular amongst the mesh advocates because, well, it's got a better protocol in terms of the return path, and also it's fixed in terms of its options, whereas Meshtastic, you can vary them to suit yourself. So quite often there's a mismatch and then you won't communicate. LoRa on APRS has made the sensible decision to fix the frequency, spreading factor, code rate, and everything else. So there's no problem there. And it's getting to be quite widely used as a tracking system. So these are the Meshtastic modes you can have. I used long fast, which is a slow data rate and a very good margin of loss for your transmission path. This is the link budget for Meshtastic. You can see long fast is just about down at the bottom. There's slow on the x-axis. You've got the data rate, and it's down in the very low data. It's hundreds of bits per second, and it's got a pretty good link budget margin there. This is actually published by Semtech, who are the original licensees of, or the original patent owners for LoRa. Right, now we've got to get to the most important point to make a fair comparison with APRS. And we remember that the graph I put up before, 14 dBs was what APRS achieved over AFSK, non-coherent over FM, at a 10 to the minus 5 error rate. If we look at this graph, if we look at the spreading factor 12, which is the blue ones, at 10 to the minus 5, it's minus 21 dBs signal to noise ratio. That's a power ratio, which is why I said we've got to compare it on a like for like, because that looks phenomenal. But the top equation there is the one you have to use to turn that signal to noise into an energy per bit to noise spectral density. And if you calculate log m, m is the spreading factor. It's the power of the 2 to the spreading factor. So using that, we see we have to add 25 dBs to that, and the energy per bit to noise spectral density at 10 to the minus 5 is 4 dBs. And that comes from that IE ComSec paper, which is a really good paper for anybody interested in LoRa performance. Right, so this is APRS.FI, which tracks all APRS transmissions on 144.8 megs for 2 meters. How I got this track was at my house in Woodbridge there, or Wendy's house, I should say. I put an aerial up there and implemented an iGate with one of the LoRa modules. So it received the signals on 439 megs, shoved them on the internet and into the server on APRS.FI. So this is the track that I made round Woodbridge. Included various forms of transport, as you can see, including the river. And that was about 3 kilometers. That at a tenth of the power, well, probably 16 dBs less power than the FM system. Meshtastic achieved pretty much the same. So this is what my comparison has drawn, the conclusion drawn. First of all, you must remember it's line of sight. Whatever modulation you use, if there's anything in the way, it's not going to work. You get huge amounts of loss, which doesn't matter what you've got. So it is line of sight. The other input, so LoRa on the theoretical front, as we saw, 14 dBs versus 4, that's a 10 dB difference, which equates to 10 times in the power, albeit over an additive white Gaussian noise channel, which is not very representative of a mobile environment, but it's a pretty good start. So that is my conclusions and some of the reasons why it is better. Finally, that's the net results. A nice warm bed to come back to. Okay, thank you very much.